The first time I came to CeBIT was in the 80s, and at that time I had the first virtual reality company, and a bunch of us would come, and we came for a few years in a row. We'd always stay in a home of a very kind family that rented us rooms because the hotels were sold out, and we would show the first virtual reality machines here, and it was insane. I remember just feeling every year, oh my God, CeBIT, how are we going to handle it? Because it was just such a giant event back then. Oh my God. In those days, we were filled with idealism. We were filled with dreams. It felt like virtual reality was opening up a new kind of channel between people, a new way that we'd understand each other better. We felt that we had a chance to make the world better, to improve human understanding, to make culture more exciting and beautiful. And all of that is still true. Some of it has even happened a little bit. But even back then, we all knew in the back of our minds that technology also had potentially quite a dark side. We knew that it potentially could be a way of allowing the worst people to manipulate society. In fact, there had been warnings about this for years. I've mentioned the early work of Norbert Wiener about the potential of using computers in behavior modification schemes, although he believed the technology would never allow for it. And yet, he was worried about the potential. We worried about the potential for AI to be abusive in movies like 2001. I even worked on a movie called Minority Report about the potential for technology to become abusive in a society. So we were always aware of this potential dark side, but in those days, back in the 1980s and the early 1990s, I believe that if we just emphasized the good, if we just talked about the good, if we just tried to make it as real as possible in our imaginations, that we would just magically set a course where the good side of technology would prevail. In retrospect, I believe that my own optimism and all of our optimism back then was justified. I still am optimistic. I still believe in the potential for technology to be a way for people to help themselves get along better with each other. I still believe in the potential of technology to be beautiful, to be magical. But I think we misunderstood. I think we made very serious mistakes about what you do to avoid the dark side. And that's what I wish to talk to you about today. I wish to talk about the nature of the dark side of digital technology and what methods we can use to avoid the dark side. Because so far, we are not avoiding the dark side. Instead, unfortunately, the dark side of technology has been winning, and it's very, very sad and scary. So, I'd like to give you a very approximate history of human power. So, for a long time, power, meaning the ways that some people could have more influence than other people, was created through violence. Those who could create a system of potential physical threats against others were able to become more powerful. This was true for thugs, for criminals, it was true for generals, it was true for tyrants, it was true for kings. Then, media technology started to evolve, and it provided an alternate way to create power through influencing how people thought in a mass scale and in a coordinated way. Without saying anything, I don't mean for this to be any criticism of religion as a spiritual thing, but if you consider religion as an exercise in creating power, the early publication of books like the Bible created a coordinated communications project that influenced power in a new way that wasn't directly violent. We could call that progress, actually. The very terrible events in the early 20th century with the rise of fascism here and elsewhere was also driven by new advances in technology, at least in part. There's no question that the Nazi regime relied on cinema, on radio, even pioneered television. And I would argue that every time we have a new advance in media technology, we inevitably will run through a period of time in which some of the worst elements of our species, some of the worst people, will figure out a way to use that technology to exert influence and to create power for themselves. And I believe that right now, we are going through another iteration of that, and we don't yet know how bad it will get. It's possible that it won't be as bad this time, but it's also possible that it'll be quite bad. We're still in the very early stages of it. What's different this time is the continuous surveillance of people on a mass basis and the use of algorithms to modify the media that those individuals receive in order to implement behavior modification techniques. That has never existed before. Well, to be precise, it has existed in very isolated circumstances before. For instance, in the past, if you became a member of an abusive cult, the cult would watch you constantly and constantly adjust how you were handled in order to break you, in order to make you become more of a member, more engaged. In the past, if you were on the wrong side of a table being interrogated in a police station, the police might try to observe you and figure out a way to break you. In the past, if you were in an abusive personal relationship, your partner might observe you constantly and figure out ways to adjust in order to break you. But never before has there been constant surveillance of everyone coupled with constant adjustment with the way those people are given information and experiences in order that they may be broken. There has been constant surveillance before. It happened with the Stasi, as you know better than me. It happens currently in regimes like the North Korean regime. But this coupling of constant surveillance with constant adjustment of the experience of a person in order to change that person's behavior, that has never been possible on a mass basis before. And yet that is precisely what is going on now. I find it terrifying. I find it embarrassing and even humiliating that this extremely idealistic technology industry to which I've devoted my life has been the agent that has created it. It's a very awful outcome. We can talk about whether anybody should be blamed or not. To a degree, we all should be blamed because, as I was saying earlier, all of the warnings were there. We expressed all the cautions. We talked about it. On the other hand, there's a sense in which nobody really understood it. We only had a sort of a theoretical, intellectual understanding of this threat, and somehow the way it's unfolded in reality didn't match up with anything we'd been specifically warned against. So in a sense, it was still a surprise. A lot of what happened is our very best intentions turned out to create the worst outcomes. One of our intentions, and by ours I mean the idealistic side of the technology community, one of our best intentions was to create a very open world. We wanted software to be open source, we wanted music to be free, we wanted news to be free, we wanted this very transparent world, which of course seemed at the time and still seems like a positive value. But at the same time, we mythologized some figures in the technology world. We had what in America we'd call a cowboy mythology or a macho mythology about the great hackers or the great entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs. And the thing is, if you try to combine this idea of openness and everything being free with this mythology about super hackers and super entrepreneurs, the combination leaves you room for only one solution, which is the advertising model. So companies like Google and Facebook were founded with the idea that everything will be free, but there'll be advertising. And at first, it really was advertising. And I don't have any objection to advertising. I think, although advertising has sometimes been annoying, it's overall been a force for good, because I believe it's helped modernize the world, which has been overall a good thing. So I'm not anti-advertising. However, because of Moore's Law, because of advances in science, because of advances in the sophistication of people who use the systems on the internet, both good people and bad people, because of everything getting more and more accelerated, what started off as advertising inevitably turned into the massive continuous surveillance and behavior modification schemes that terrify me so much now. So what's going on is that when you use free online services, like Facebook, for instance, or the Google ecosystem, YouTube and so forth, or other services, Twitter, there are other examples, your data is being gathered into a remote, hidden server that belongs to a company. And what's so strange about this is that the software that's manipulating you often runs on open source. There'll be an Apache stack or something. There'll be this open source thing, and the whole point of open source was to prevent this sort of thing from happening. But since it's on somebody else's computer, the fact that it's open source doesn't help you. You still don't get to see what's going on. You don't get to see Google's algorithm or Facebook's algorithm. So open turned out to mean closed. Right? So these hidden algorithms are calculating what's going on with you. They're watching you, they're correlating every little thing about you, what you respond to, who you know, what kinds of things you've done, what you've bought, where you've gone, with other people who have some superficial similarity to you. They build up correlations with all of you, and then they figure out under what circumstances can some small percentage of you be made to buy something? Or perhaps some small percentage of you can be made cynical and can be prevented from voting. This has been a huge problem in the United States. Whatever it is, some of the people who use the system are legitimate users, who are advertisers, who are paying into the companies. Others are illegitimate users who are just figuring out a way to leverage the system to their own purposes. And the most prominent example that we know about might be the Russian intelligence warfare units that have intervened in elections such as the American election and Brexit and so forth. This is a system that it creates damage in a gradual, distributed way. Its power is not dramatic in any particular case. It doesn't exert mind control over you minute to minute. It just has a statistical influence on you where you might be a few percentage points more likely to buy something than you would have been. But the thing is, over the big picture, over tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people, that small distributed effect creates these giant fortunes and this giant centralization of power. The metaphor I like to describe this is compound interest. When you invest money and you have a small amount of interest, if it's compound interest, it can lead to a very significant result. And in the same way, these statistical behavior modification schemes, even though their results are incredibly slight on a minute-to-minute basis, and it might be impossible for you to be consciously aware of the way that you've been modified by using these systems, over time, the cumulative effect can be very significant. It appears to be destroying my country, the United States, for instance. Our own recent Director of National Security has declared that it appears that social media manipulations by the Russians threw our last election. And honestly, this is a terrifying moment. We don't know what scenario we're in. We don't know where this ends. And if you hear terror in my voice, it's very real. I really don't know where this is going. And In my case, my mother's parents were in Vienna before the war, and they thought things couldn't get that bad, and they stayed too long and ended up all being in concentration camps. My mother was a survivor. She was taken at age 13. So I have this very keen sense of this terror of not knowing. I don't know how bad this will get. What we hope is that we will learn our lessons and we will make corrections soon enough to avoid the worst. Even though it seems right now like maybe it's not that bad, how could it be that bad? We don't know. Like I say, it's like compound interest. It builds cumulatively. So let me make a comment about what the correctives can look like. Most of the correctives thus far are in the form of telling the companies what they can't do. Some of the pressure has come in the United States from users who put pressure on the companies to do things like repress hate speech or bullying or false news or many other things. And I understand and appreciate the motivations of people who do that, but there's a problem, which is every time you petition the companies to do this sort of thing, you're, in a sense, making their power more entrenched. You're treating them more and more like a monarch who you appeal to and hope for relief, but you have no real power. You're acknowledging that the power rests in this remote company. And indeed, the more the companies accede to these kinds of demands, I think the more the underlying system of behavior modification becomes entrenched. And so even in the short term, it might feel like a gain. In the longer term, I'm afraid it is not at all. It's a loss. One of the unfortunate qualities of the behavior modification scheme is that the algorithms that are surveilling everybody and making slight changes that influence everybody's behavior do so on a very rapid measurement and response timescale. So you're measured very quickly after stimulus has been received by, say, a change in your social media feed. And the problem with that is that the most rapidly changing emotional effects that cause behavior change happen to, in general, not with, there's some exceptions, but in general, they tend to be the more negative emotions. Anger and paranoia, irritation, these things rise more quickly and linger longer than positive feelings like trust, interest, understanding. These things take a while to build. So this very rapid feedback system tends to emphasize the negative things. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the best meaning activists have actually created exactly the opposite of what they wanted. A very prominent example might be the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was sometimes called the Facebook Revolution or the Google Revolution, and it created this very rapid, very easy wave of apparent successes for democracy advocates in the Arab world. And yet, just a short time later, groups like ISIS got even more power and more amplification from the same social media systems. And I would argue the reason why is that these systems emphasize the negative emotions better. Negative players get more mileage. Indeed, Facebook amplifies the reach of an advertiser according to how much the algorithms find that that advertiser increases the user's addiction, or they call it engagement. But if your advertisement causes people to stay on Facebook more, then your advertisement will be shown more, even if you pay the same amount as someone else. And Donald Trump's social media director has claimed that they got a vast amplification as compared to Hillary Clinton's social media advertising because of this. So what happens is those who can engage get this incredible amplification, and the negative emotions work faster, so therefore they're amplified more. So you start with the Arab Spring, then what you get is ISIS. Similarly, in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement, which was organized as an attempt to protect African Americans who are being disproportionately killed in unjustified police violence, quickly turned into a resurgence of the most racist elements of American history that had been absolutely unseen in generations of the Ku Klux Klan and the American neo-Nazi movement. And this will keep on happening. So, for these reasons, I feel that direct appeals to the companies to change their policies might be well-meaning and might still be worthwhile, might have important short-term benefits and might be necessary even, and yet in the long term they do not lead to any kind of a solution. They just make things worse. So then what else can we do? Some of you here might have heard of something called the GDPR, and this is interesting. In my opinion, we can't know fully what it means or whether we like it or not until we see how it develops more and what the courts make of it and how the companies respond to it and all. I think it's still too early. But what I do want to point out is that the GDPR is fundamentally a system of telling companies what not to do rather than what to do. It seems to me that the only path to a solution must include a prominent component that suggests an alternative that's better, something positive that can be done rather than just a bunch of injunctions about what not to do. And if we look at what can be done, we see a different spectrum of options. I think any positive option has to be one that provides the services of things like search and social media, but without the constant surveillance and behavior modification. So it would have to be some version of these things where instead of having a feed that's calculated to change you, it's a feed that's totally transparent, that you design, you control, and you understand, and there's no third parties having influence on it. So can that exist? Well, there are a few paths. One direction would be to say these things shouldn't even be businesses. These services should be like the public library. They should be guaranteed to be neutral. They should be guaranteed to not have an agenda. In other words, they should be nationalized. To my knowledge, there's only one country that's announced an experiment with nationalizing Facebook, and that's Papua New Guinea. I don't know much about that situation, and I don't know what success or potential they might achieve. I should say that in the United States, the notion of nationalizing our big companies seems very, very remote as a possibility politically, and personally, it's not even something I'd support. So let's set that one aside. What other options are there? One that has interested me a great deal, that seems quite obvious, is to turn them into real businesses instead of advertising-only businesses. So in other words, you'd pay a fee to use something like search or social media, but it would be a small fee. And indeed, you might be paid if you contribute to such systems in a way that's really valuable. So as far as paying for things, some people have an immediate revulsion. Oh my God, I can't pay for internet things. They're supposed to be free. But I want to remind you of a very interesting contest that just took place in the last few years. There were a great many idealists in the technology world who believed that in the future, all TVs and movies should be totally free and should be created for free by volunteers, very much in the way that the Wikipedia is created. And then there were other companies that said, well, wait, with the internet for the first time, we can have a direct billing relationship with people for our TVs and movies. And these were companies like Netflix, as a famous one. And I think there's no question that this was a fair contest and that the people who wanted to charge won. People do pay for Netflix, and the result has been what is called peak TV. And this is repeated with many other companies. So I think we could imagine something like that for social media, where those who can afford actually pay for it, those who can't would receive a subsidy. And it would get better because then it would be in the service of the user instead of for third parties. We've created this bizarre system where if two people are to have contact of any kind over the internet, the only way it can be financed is by a third party whose motivation is to manipulate those two. It's bizarre. And we're so used to it that we don't realize how bizarre it is, how sick it is. But we can easily imagine with the Netflix example that we could instead pay and get what we want, what we choose. Similarly, the big tech companies are all in this AI race, and they say, well, the reason we're gathering all your data is to create the robots that will put you out of work. But an alternative to that is if we paid people for their data, we might be able to create a new path to dignity and for motivating people to create great data, even as AI and robots get really good, because they need a lot of data. So there's also a way in which this question of mass mind control plays into the question of whether AI will be the enemy or the friend of employment in the future. But that's a whole other topic. Anyway, if we want to speak positively instead of just negatively about what companies like Google and Facebook can do in order to not destroy our world, we can list some options. One is to cease to exist. Another is to become real businesses instead of fake businesses. There might be others as well. Those are the two I'm aware of. But this continuous stream of don't do this, don't do that, don't do that is unlikely to create a positive outcome. We need to have a vision of what they can do that's outside of the mind control regime. So I think I might have spoken for longer than I was supposed to. My apologies for that. I'll just leave you with one thought. A lot of people have a terror that if they don't have social media accounts, they won't exist. Nobody will know about me. I won't have a career. I won't have partners romantically. Everything will go away. I'll lose touch with my family. I just want to tell you, I don't have accounts on these things. There's some fake ones. There's like fake versions of me on Twitter and stuff, but none of that's real. I have nothing, and yet I still write books. I still have a public life. I think this whole terror that if you don't buy into the system, you'll cease to exist is completely an illusion. And if you do try getting out of it, you might discover it's not really so hard. And I encourage you to do it, because if everybody's in the system, then nobody has perspective, nobody's putting pressure, nobody can see alternatives. It's crucial for at least a part of the society to remain outside of the stupid system so that we can see our way to the future. All right, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. And please have a seat over there. I guess you need the mic here. Yes. And I will give you the opener also. Here we go. So, yeah, thanks for that. Actually, let's start with a question about your book.
Yes.
The US edition has a cat on the cover, like a black cat leaving to the left. Now, in our edition here, there is some pristine mountain scenery. So why the difference there, and basically why the cat?
I like mountains and I like cats.
Okay.
So I'm very happy with both covers. So the book, of course, starts with a metaphor about cats, because cats are kind of remarkable. Unlike other domesticated animals, they're not really quite domesticated. You can take a house cat and show the house cat the forest, and the house cat will survive. Cats have never become really fully domesticated. They've integrated themselves into modernity, but without losing their wild nature. And so to me, I think the reason why cats are so popular online is that they're a symbol of what people want to be online. We want to be able to be modern. We want to enjoy the comforts that cats enjoy, but we want to be like cats and not just become totally subservient, like, cows or something where we can't take care of ourselves. And so the cat is the symbol of the human future that we desire, in my view. Now, that particular cat on the American edition is a real cat. His name's Potato. He belongs to my daughter, and he was rescued from a parking lot in Oakland, California. So he's kind of a little Black Panther, and he's a very sweet cat.
Yeah. So of course, this cat has a meaning. You've mentioned that, and this mountain scenery also, since it gives you a break, basically, breath of fresh air if you turn your social media accounts off. But if I understood your book correctly, you don't advise necessarily to leave social media forever, right? But just for like now, but basically not forever. That's right?
Look, it's very important to understand that I don't claim to know your life. I don't claim to know anyone's life. So I don't believe that it's up to me to tell people what to do. And if somebody feels that they need social media, either because it helps their career or it helps their family or it helps them emotionally, whatever, it's not my job to tell them that they're wrong. And they might be right. And indeed, I think the last thing somebody should do is harm their career or their family because of some ideology. So what I do suggest, though, is that we have to be able to have a mind space outside of social media in order to understand social media. And if everybody's in it all the time, then it's impossible to have perspective. So if you've never been outside of it, if you're young enough that you grew up with social media and that's all you know, you should at least take 6 months off it so you can know yourself without it, and then you have a perspective. And I think without that perspective, we can't be free. You know, and right now there's such a universality that it's really creating a bizarre feeling that there aren't options when in fact there are, and we must cut through that. If we're going to be free people, if we're going to have democracy, there has to be some diversity in how we think, and that cannot exist if everybody's locked into this stupid system.
And after that, the alternative is to pay for stuff, to get rid of the advertising model, to have a choice to get a social media system that I pay for and that's transparent in exchange, right?
Well, look, I'm not anti-advertising. I'm anti-continuous behavior modification. So if somebody wants to put up an ad, that's fine. It's just that it shouldn't be based on individual data designed to manipulate the person.
That's reality now.
Right. So what we're calling advertising is not advertising, it's behavior modification. If the ad cannot watch you, if the ad is only hopeful that it'll make sense to you, then I'm fine with it. And so, for instance, I'm fine with brand advertising. I'm fine with a lot of kinds of advertising. I just don't want continuous behavior modification that creates addiction. And then as far as this idea of paying for it, of making it into a business, part of the reason I like that is I love Silicon Valley, and I don't think I'm a little concerned that what'll happen is things will go very bad and then the world will force the companies out of existence or something, and I think that would be very sad. I've had relationships with many of the companies. I've sold a company to Google, for instance. I've been working with Microsoft for many years.
You still do, right?
I do, yeah. Although I'm not speaking for I say things that are very much not. I have an agreement with Microsoft to even criticize them in public if I feel a need to. So I don't speak for them remotely. But the thing is, I actually like the tech industry. I like the tech companies. It's my environment. So it just seems so plain and so obvious that both the tech companies and all the smaller companies that are part of the ecosystem would do better if we turned into real businesses instead of fake businesses. By a fake business, I mean a business that doesn't actually sell something to customers, but instead to third parties who want to manipulate the user. So if we just turn into real companies, I just think we'll do better. Can I give you one example of that?
Sure.
If you look at the big 5 tech companies currently, there's only 2 of them that rely on continuous behavior modification almost exclusively for their profits.
Facebook and Google.
Facebook and Google. The other 3, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, do not. Okay. Now, if you look at those same companies and you ask, which companies have been able to diversify their profit centers, you'll find the same division. Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, you might dislike them, you might have many complaints about them, and many of your complaints might be completely valid. Okay, I'm not saying that these are perfect companies. However, just from a shareholder perspective, they've all diversified their profit centers. But if you look at Google and Facebook, they can diversify their cost centers all they want. They can spend billions of dollars on balloons and virtual reality and solving death, according to Google, and all these crazy things. And yet their profit center remains one thing because they're addicted to this stupid model, very much like a petrostate is addicted to oil. It prevents them from evolving. It makes them uncreative. They have a desperate grasping attempt to be creative, but fundamentally they cannot be. So I actually think it would be much better for a company like Google to get out of this stupid business model. Because they're wonderful people at Google. I think they're being held back.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is with all those other Alphabet ventures, they are basically producing costs and not any revenue or profit. because the only thing that they are able to do is to sell ads.
Right, and I reject calling them ads. We have to call it what it is.
Behavior modification.
Behavior modification loops is what they're selling, and they're selling them to people who are terrified that they won't even exist if they don't pay into the system. You know, a brand will feel like, unless I'm paying Google and Facebook, nobody will even know about me. So it's I call it the existential protection racket. You know, like the mob says, oh, it would be a shame if your shop was destroyed. You better pay us protection money. And in this way, it's like your identity might be destroyed if you don't pay into the system. It's an undignified way to make money, and Silicon Valley should be better than that. The whole tech industry should be better than that.
Do you think things get better if you pay for them?
Well, in the example of television, it turned out to be true.
Netflix,
or at least, yeah, Netflix, HBO. I don't know fully what services are available in every country, but in general, people have found that television has been better since people have had a direct paying relationship. So Netflix doesn't have advertising, but it has a subscription, and suddenly people seem to like it better. They call it peak TV. I have to say, personally, I'm not necessarily that moved by some of the TV shows that are very popular as a result, but that's neither here nor there. The thing is that it seems to be working for people. They like those dragons, you know, they like them. And so it's great. People liked TV before, but they seem to like it better under this regime where they pay for it. So why couldn't that be true for social media and search?
So peak social media is conceivable.
Yeah, and I think current social media and current search are not really that great. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. One of the things that's been happening in my life is for the last few years, my wife has been battling cancer, and successfully. She seems to be through it, but it was a very difficult process. And during that time, we would go online and try to get good information, and it's almost impossible because there's this giant mountain of manipulative nonsense from all kinds of pseudoscience people, and the thing is, you know, in computer security, we have this concept of a denial of service attack, right? And so what's going on is you don't directly attack somebody's server, but you create so much traffic to it through your botnet that you essentially make it inaccessible, right? What's going on online is a constant universal denial of service attack on a cultural level. If you want to get good information about anything important, you have to fight your way through a mountain of manipulative crap. And peak social media would not be like that. Peak social media would be you're paying for what you want instead of other people trying to manipulate you as the primary business.
So in that example, Dr. Google would be way better than it is right now.
In that example, yes, it would be. Here's the thing I want to say, though. I'm very hesitant to criticize any particular service from a company for many reasons. One of them is that since I'm part of the industry, I really don't want to play favorite. So I'm really unwilling to criticize a specific Google service unless you can give me a parallel one from Microsoft I can also criticize.
Okay.
So
yeah, well, it could be Dr. Bing, of course,
Dr.
also.
Bing. I don't know if there is a Dr. Bing.
No problem.
The thing is, I really want to emphasize here, I'm actually pro-Google. I actually believe that the position I'm taking would be very positive and creative and commercially effective for Google.
There is one thing you've mentioned in your speech here also. It's easier to lose trust than to build love. People don't think enough about that, right?
Let's be very clear about this. It's not so much that it's easier to lose trust than to build trust. It's that they have different profiles in time. If you've ever used a music synthesizer, you know the concept of an envelope where a sound like a drum or a guitar rises very quickly and then goes away slowly. And then there are other sounds like a violin section or an orchestra that rise slowly. And so the thing about, it's not that trust is any less powerful overall than loss of trust in human affairs. It's just that it has a different envelope, a different timing profile. And since it takes longer to build trust than to lose trust, and the algorithms are based on very rapid feedback, they tend to emphasize paranoia and crankiness and resentment more than trust and love and so forth. It's a timing thing. If you look outside of social media at experiments in psychology, positive emotions actually are as powerful as negative ones. The problem is that the way the internet works, it's very much like high frequency trading in a market. High frequency measurement and high frequency response tends to emphasize whatever effects occur in a short time span. And so this difference between emotions that rise quickly and rise slowly, which has not been quite so important before in human affairs, suddenly becomes extremely important.
That's what Donald Trump's social media team knows and is playing very well, right?
It's a very interesting question about Trump, because it's not clear to me to what degree all of this was understood in advance. I think some of the players who I find personally to be negative and to be destroying our world, including the Russian intelligence warfare units and the Trump campaign and others, I don't think they actually fully understood this. I think that they were just lucky that they happened to benefit from it. Trump in particular, as a person, is somebody I've met a few times over the years. I've never really known him, but it does seem to me that his very strong insecurity and impulsiveness is a more recent development in his character and is a direct result of his addiction to Twitter. And I think if his addiction was cured, he would have a better character. So there's a sense in which he's a victim.
So he should switch it off also.
Yeah, I mean, of course he should. Of course he should switch it off. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that'll happen. It's very hard to go to an addict and say, "Oh, change yourself."
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's what addiction is.
Well, you've mentioned the Russians also. I didn't want to overhear this. Is Kaspersky safe?
I have no direct knowledge about Kaspersky, but I would tend to. I wouldn't use it myself. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Okay. Point taken. So, given all that, where is hope?
Well, my principal argument for hope is just looking at human history and how we've faced all these horrible things of many, many kinds and many dimensions over time, and we seem to come through. And things do seem to get better over time, despite everything in the big picture. I do want to say something, though, about optimism and pessimism. Sometimes there's a sort of a cult of optimism in Silicon Valley, and people say to me, how can you be so pessimistic? And the thing is, I think the critic is the true optimist. You know, I think it's true that things have gradually gotten better in history. Writers like Steven Pinker and others have documented how over time we've had better health and better wealth and more peace. And I think that's quite accurate. And every single time something has gotten better, it's because somebody has been saying, oh my God, this is terrible, we have to make this better. I don't think it's like automatic. It's not like angels are coming down and making things better. It's the enemy of the future is not pessimism, it's complacency. It's the pessimist who actually makes the future better. Okay,
so enough pessimists around in Germany. So we're in good shape here.
I hope so. I think you're, I mean, it's a very strange thing right now, but, you know, I just have to say it's desperately important that any countries in the world that can cling to a little bit of sanity have to not let go of that sanity. And I'm not sure my own country is going to be one of them, so it's very important for you to be one of them.
We'll try. Thank you, Yaron. Thank you.